episode number 26 with Rob Asselstine. I never really met Rob until last summer. I've known about him for a very long time, but we just kind of connected not too long ago. Super talented guy and always has something on the go. He's really involved in studio life at the beginning of his career, piano player, and really moved into producing some great live shows. And it's a great listen back and finding out how he got to where he is now. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Rob Asselstine.
When people ask me how I've come to where I am now, I typically tell them that it's the word I continue to come with is serendipity.
Yeah.
A fortuitous accidents to get to the point in my life that I'm at now.
Seems like a lot of people are like that. Everything is always, nothing's ever planned. I mean, you have an idea of what you maybe want to do, but the more I talk to people, the more I find out that there are so many little things that were accidents that shouldn't have happened that got you to where you are. And
that's exactly right. I grew up in a town called Wallaceburg.
Yeah.
Now, Wallaceburg is down near Chatham and Sarnia, and we're about 3 miles from the border and about 60 miles from Detroit. And so when I was growing up in the late 50s and the 60s, the only media that we had available to us was really coming out of Detroit.
Yeah.
London was somewhere that we only imagined. Toronto was on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So listening to a radio station called CKLW, the Big 8 out of Windsor, was really where I got my first taste of music. My parents were sort of musical. My dad sang in a barbershop quartet.
Yeah.
So I listened to a lot of barbershop music when I was growing up.
You probably learn lots of harmonies.
Yeah, and barbershop harmony is unique, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And when we were kids, live music was really something that we either experienced at our high school or at a place called Rondo Park down on Lake Erie. So it was one of those towns where there really wasn't much musical things happening.
Yeah.
We just passed February 9th, and on February 9th, 1964, I was sitting in front of the TV along with millions of other people to watch the Beatles for the first time.
Wow.
On Ed Sullivan. We had one of those old TVs that was sort of like a piece of furniture and had 2 barn doors on the front of it. So you opened the barn doors and you could swivel the TV to wherever you were sitting in the room. So I saw the Beatles, and it changed my life. When I had been so engaged with Motown music, really, because at Rondo Park we would see, I saw George Clinton and the Parliament Funkadelic for the first time.
Yeah.
That was frightening.
Yeah.
And from what I gather, George still looks pretty much the same as he did back then. But we would see Ted Nugent would come and play in our local arena. Bob Seger and the Bob Seger system at that time would play a group called the Sparrows, which later became Steppenwolf, played at our high school. We saw most of the Motown acts live at the Rondo Park Pavilion, and it was one of those places where there was we called it a racetrack around the outside. Yeah. So all the dancing would go on in the center section. Yeah. All the girls would sit on the benches around the outside, and the guys would cruise. Right. and
the racetrack.
That's what we called it. Mm-hmm. And try to pretend like we were brave enough to ask one of the girls to dance, and most of the time we never did. Yeah. But if I step back, my mom and dad decided that I would be a musician. When I was about 4 years old. Yeah. So they bought an old Grinnell Brothers player piano. And Grinnell Brothers was a store in Detroit. Yeah. And I still have that player piano today.
Do you?
Yeah, it's in storage. Yeah. In a U-Haul storage, and every once in a while in the summertime, I'll open up the door and sit there and play for a while. Wow. So I serenade the other folks at U-Haul every now and then. But so I started a band with my brother and my cousin
So you're playing piano, obviously.
No. I never wanted to play piano.
Oh yeah.
No, I wanted to play guitar. I wanted to be a Beatle.
Yeah.
And so my first few years in the band was playing guitar or attempting to play guitar as best I could as a young teenager. And I worked at a grocery store not far from our home, 85 cents an hour. It was a great job.
Yeah.
Loved it. And I was at what they called a carryout at that point in time. So there was always a bagger at every cashier.
Yeah.
And then we would carry people's groceries out to their car. Or because it was a small town, we'd actually carry them right to their house.
Yeah.
You know, if they were within a few blocks. And one night, the manager found that there was the guy in the produce department was sick or something and couldn't come in. And he asked me if I would come over and work in produce, and I said, sure, why not? It seems like an easy enough job. And he showed me how to prepare some of the vegetables that go onto the counter. And I didn't know at the time, but lettuce arrives at the store with a stalk on it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And so he said, well, all you have to do is you cut the stalk off, and then you put the lettuce up on the shelf, and it's all good.
Yeah.
So he showed me how to do it. And in those days, there was a machine that had a round piece on the end of it with a cowling that came out around it and a razor on this wheel.
I can see where this is heading.
Yeah. So exactly. So the wheel spins really fast.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to stick the lettuce stalk straight in.
Yeah.
And pull it out. Okay. And then put it over in a bin. So I did the first few, and I was doing just fine. And then I put one in, and I turned my hand to the right, and my second finger on my left hand got hit with that razor about 3 times on the knuckle. Yeah. And so my finger, the furthest extension of my finger from the knuckle was straight down.
Oh.
Excuse me. So they rushed me to the hospital. They put my finger back in the right position.
Yeah.
On my left hand, which a guitar player knows is a very important hand.
Yeah.
And I had to wear a splint. So I couldn't play guitar. And so I went back to the piano because of my piano lessons, and I hated playing piano as a kid. But then somebody told me that chicks dig musicians. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna give this a whack. So when you've got a splint on your finger on your left hand, and you're playing piano, you can only really play octaves.
Yeah. So
that's all I could do. And most of my musician friends will tell me that don't hire Rob for his left hand work because it's not there. Yeah. He plays a lot of octaves, but that's about it. So that became, what I was playing in the band.
So did you keep your produce job, or did you get back to?
I went back to bagging after that. and then a couple of years later, I was on my bike watching a baseball game with a friend of mine, and we'd had our bikes leaned up against the chain link fence and our hands over the top of the chain link fence.
Yeah.
And back in those days, chain link fences had little
cross
pieces on the top where they're very sharp.
Yeah.
And the guy that I was with thought it would be funny to kick my bike out from underneath me, and I reached up with my right hand to keep myself from falling.
Yeah. And
managed to puncture the palm on my right hand.
Wow. Lucky you.
Yeah. So that explains a lot of my piano playing over the years.
But you're an injured man.
I'm an injured man, indeed. And so, when we went back to playing with the band, we brought in some other guys. And one time at the high school, they had 2 pianos on the stage, and I did the 2 piano thing with one piano with my left hand and one piano with my right hand. And had a lot of fun doing that. But
so you're playing mostly kind of Beatles and Motown,
and kind of rockabilly-ish kind of stuff. We had our record player out in the living room, and the piano was in the back room. So in order to learn a song, because there were no cassette machines, I would have to be in the living room listening as best as I possibly could, then run to the back room and try to recreate that sound. So it worked out for the most part, and you know, it did end up. I did acquire a couple of girlfriends as a result of being in the local band, and I was kind of presented as the guy that was going to be a musician. My brother is a sportsman, so he's a hockey player and a lacrosse player. So that's kind of how the family culture split. He was the sports guy, I was the music guy. At the time, we were all kind of programmed in high school to leave the town. Nobody was really encouraging anybody to stay home.
Yeah.
It was all, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to university? You're going to get a degree. And because music was the only thing that I knew, I studied harmony and theory with the local piano teacher, you know, in her front room. And so I studied grade 1 and grade 2 harmony and theory, which is one of the prerequisites to get into university. And I kept with my piano lessons and got my grade 10 piano.
Yeah.
All the while playing not like the classical guys. I could never really bring myself to be a classical musician. I was more of a barroom kind of player, more of a R&B, you know, style player. And so when time came to try out for university, I applied to 5 universities. 4 of them turned me down on the same day, my brother's birthday.
Oh, no way.
I'm a real sad story guy. I mean, I'm just realizing that. Anyhow, so the last place that I auditioned at was what was called at that time Waterloo Lutheran University, which is now Wilfrid Laurier. And they didn't have a faculty. They had a music department. And the chairman of the department at the time was a fellow by the name of Walter Kemp, Dr. Walter Kemp. And I came in for the audition. I knew that I had failed miserably at Queen's and at U of T and at Western.
What do you think were you nervous going in, or is it?
By the time I got to Waterloo, no. I was pretty much, you know, resigned that I was going to be doing something other than music.
Yeah.
But I came up and I said to him, I'm not a great classical piano player, but I'm applying here to be in the piano program. And so he said, well, just play something for me. So I just noodled around like I had with the band or like I did when I was at home.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, well, let's do this. He said, I'm going to play the first half of a phrase, and I want you to finish it. And for me, that was really easy.
Yeah.
Because it was like any song that I had ever played. So, you know, song form is question and answer, right?
Yeah.
So I played the answer to the things that he was playing, and he accepted me into the university, and he said, "Don't change." And I said, "Really? That's pretty amazing that you don't want me to change." And he said, "Well, you're going to learn a lot of theory, but what I want you to do is to bring yourself to this exercise instead of us trying to put you into a pigeonhole."
Yeah.
Okay. So improvisation was something that was very easy for me. I learned writing in forms, fugues, chorales, you know, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And he would tell me that I'm going to give you, again, an opening phrase, and I'm going to send you away. I want you to write a 2-part fugue or a 4-part fugue or a toccata, any of those other forms. But he said, I want you to write rhythms that make sense to you.
Yeah.
And so I would write swing. You know, one time I listened to now I'm going to forget Aqualung, who
you.
no,
Yeah.
Jethro Tull.
Okay.
There you go. And I listened to them play Bourrée. And then I had known the classical version of Bourrée, and I heard the swing version from a rock band.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I thought, okay, that's exactly, you know, where I'm at. That's what I like. So within the music department at that time, I became known as the guy who wasn't the classical guy. He was the secular guy that was coming in and stirring things up. Long hair, beard, you know, the whole 9 yards.
But that's pretty interesting that your teacher saw the value of that, because I think a lot of teachers wouldn't, but obviously he must have had part of that in him as well.
Well, I consider, he was a writer. I think that he felt that people at university were largely being prepared to go back into the educational system to become teachers.
Yeah.
So you learn how to do something that's 200 years old, and then you go back and you teach somebody else 200 years old, and it's just perpetual. It's just, nothing changes. So he was fortunately a very skilled reader and piano player. Mm-hmm. And my piano capabilities in the classical field were limited, like I said. So I would write these things, and then I would hear him play them.
Oh, yeah.
And they sounded pretty good.
Yeah.
And there was no digital recording at the time, and the music department really consisted of two houses on a street. One was called the Piano House. No insulation, but pianos in every room.
Yeah.
So I would virtually live there. And one of the things that in my study I learned was figured bass. And I'll come back to figured bass in a moment. So figured bass and improvisation were two of the programs that I was involved with.
Yeah.
And I'll jump way ahead. When I learned the Nashville number system,
Yeah.
and I said, "Hey guys, this is figured bass. This is 400 years old. This is not new. A 1 is a 1 is a 1, whatever key you're playing in.
Yeah.
In a 6/4 chord, or any of the other numeric references that people make in Nashville or when we're doing sessions are really rooted in figured bass from back in those days. So when I was at school, I was still trying to write. I was still trying to play the kind of music that I wanted to play. And this is where the serendipity comes in. A young lady invited me to a party. And she said, "I want you to meet this guy. His cousins are building a recording studio." I thought, okay, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
I initially wanted to be a film composer, and I still follow film composers quite a bit. But I met Paul Mercy,
Mm-hmm.
and up until that point, I don't think I had ever heard country music at all.
Yeah.
Nothing. Tommy Hunter, maybe.
Yeah.
Just before the hockey games on Saturday night.
Yeah.
So Paul said, yeah, my cousins are building a studio. Come on out to Elmira and like to show you around. So I went out and I said to Larry and Lloyd and Raymond, I'd love to work here. I'd love to do something. And they said, "Well, you're a piano player, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, why don't you just sit down and play a little bit for us?" So I did, to the best of my abilities at that point. And they said, "Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to school. We'll have you come out and play on some demo sessions." Mm-hmm. Because they also owned a publishing company, Mercy Brothers Publishing. I said, "That'd be great. I'd never done a session before." And they invited me out.
So what age would you have been at that point, do you think?
Oh, probably 20, thereabouts, 19, 20. And so the very first session that I played on, the Mercies played on it, and they had two other guys. They had a guitar player and a steel player. And the guitar player was Red Shea, and the steel player was Ollie Strong.
Yeah.
And I had no idea who Red Shea and Ollie Strong were at that point. It was only afterwards that I found out, well, they play with Gord Lightfoot. Oh, okay, very nice. And Red took me aside and he said, "Son, when you're doing sessions, they're only going to feed you pizza and Kentucky Fried Chicken. And it's going to get grease all over your hands. So I'm going to tell you how to get rid of that grease." Okay. So he told me, just wash your hands with cold water, no soap, no nothing, and the grease will come off. And I've done that before every show that I've ever done since that time.
Oh, really?
And it's amazing because as a piano player, I mean, you can slip and slide all over the place.
Yeah.
But by doing that, you get a firm grip on the keyboard. So I carried on with my teachings at university, and one of the programs, one of the courses that I was in was an orchestration course.
Yeah.
And my orchestration professor was a guy by the name of Victor Sawa, and Victor played clarinet on the original Scott Joplin Red Back Book album. So when you hear The Entertainer, that's Vic playing that.
Yeah.
And he was only a couple of years older than me. And so I would orchestrate things, and obviously with no way to hear them. So everything was done from your head at the time. So most of the review of the orchestrations were, okay, have you doubled the third? You know, what interesting texture? Have you got the violins 2 octaves apart instead of 1 octave apart, because it sounds better if they're 2 octaves apart. And we would do that for about half an hour, then we'd go and shoot pool for the rest of the day.
All right.
And then the Mercies said, well, you're studying that orchestration stuff, right? I said, yeah. And they said, well, we need strings on one of these demos. Could you write the orchestration? Could you write the arrangement for the strings? And of course I said, sure.
Yeah. Of course I can.
Of course I can. And so I started doing string writing for demos. And then they asked me if I could arrange vocals, and I said, well, sure. You know, so it was about teaching, you know, the people who were doing the background vocals. And I was very fortunate to work with Ed Weidman. I don't know if you remember Ed.
No, I don't.
Ed was with a gospel group in Toronto called the King James Version.
Okay.
And my story ends up being that I'm 1 degree from almost everybody who's ever been famous in the world. Because if you watch Elvis's Aloha concert from Hawaii, you'll see 5 guys in the gospel quartet. There were 2 bass singers.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the name of the bass. J.D. Sumner.
Sumner.
Okay.
Yeah.
J.D. Allegedly, and I can't confirm this, was having some substance abuse issues.
Yeah.
Around that time. So whoever was hiring the musicians knew about Ed, and they brought Ed down to shadow J.D.
Yeah.
during that show. So if you watch the performance, Ed's close to the mic just in case J.D. fades.
Yeah.
Okay. So I started working with those guys. Did some more sessions with Red and with Ollie. Then eventually got connected with Pepe Francis, with Mike.
Yeah.
And Mike started doing sessions with us. Kim Brandt played bass on a lot of that stuff back in those days. And so I became sort of the on-call arranger and piano player.
And back then, so this is probably in 70s?
Early 70s.
Early 70s.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, you think back at the different chunks of time of how music has changed, but string arrangements were really big and those,
They were.
Yeah, at that time.
Yeah.
It was almost as if, because really there wasn't any synthesizers at that point.
No.
So that was, what synthesizers would have been doing.
Well, we had a young fellow who had an ARP Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and couldn't play for his session. So we confiscated the Odyssey, and that became the house synthesizer.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm an old guy. Fender Rhodes had just come out in that time. So, all these different keyboard sounds that were suddenly available to us. Now the ARP never even came close to the string sound. So we always had live strings. And I would contract people from the Kitchener Symphony and some folks that lived in Elmira to come out and work on stuff. One young fellow I gave a job for the very first time, and he's now with the San Francisco Symphony, and he's the principal violinist with the Skywalker Orchestra for George Lucas. So he's doing very well. And this is kind of there's a theme to this as you'll hear as I go on.
Yeah.
So initially, when I was working for the Mercies, I was working for Scale, to do sessions. And it came time for me to graduate, and I wrote some very bizarre things that were very, trendy at that time, avant-garde music. And was able to record prepared piano stuff out of the studio, and was doing a lot of tape op work there as well, learning how to edit, learning mostly how to locate, on the tape machine for the other folks that would come in. And so when it came time to graduate, I asked the Mercies, could I come and work here full time?
Yeah.
And they thought about it, and bless them, they said yes, that I could come. And I very happily reported to my parents that I was now a studio musician and that I was working in a recording studio, and it broke my mother's heart.
Oh, no.
Because she fully expected that I would become a teacher.
Oh.
Sorry, Mom. Not going to happen. And so then I traded in my session scale for a weekly salary.
Yeah.
Prepared to do anything and everything. And now that studio, man, it was great. It was a Westlake Audio Design. We had a Neve console that was originally an 8-track console that was souped up to 16 tracks.
Yeah.
We had fantastic Yamaha piano, 2-inch MCI machines, Studer mastering machines. So it was really the state of the art at that time.
I don't think I ever was in that studio. Like, I remember when they got that going, and obviously I was pretty young, but I'm trying to remember if I ever got to their studio. But it was certainly the talk around. That was the studio to go to, or.
At that time, through the 70s, we were recording pretty much the majority of the country music that was being played in Canada.
Yeah.
And the way the Mercies taught me about playing country piano was they gave me a copy of Coal Miner's Daughter, and they said, go home, learn this. You'll never need to know another lick. Lick number 42, number 43, so on and so forth. So I learned how to improvise using Pig Robbins style, and Floyd Kramer style, and that was really the vogue, at that time. I've always considered myself more of a rhythm piano player than a lead piano player. So when it comes time for the fancy right-hand work, I bring somebody else in.
Yeah.
But I generally think that I have a pretty good ability to sit in a groove. Some of my friends will tell you that I arrive a tenth of a second before everybody else. And then in the digital world now, that I can work with that.
Yeah.
But excuse me, we were talking about natural records, so I'm always just a hair ahead, of everybody. But the records did well anyway.
Yeah.
And so my $175 a week paid rent, bought some groceries, and paid for my car. So I was okay with that. And I got married in 1976. And my wife at the time had no idea what the music business was like and wasn't crazy about it. She only made one rule, and that was that she always wanted to come through the front door.
Yeah.
Musicians always come in the back door. I would say, come on, this is kind of cool to come in the back door. No, I want to come in the front door. Yeah. So we did that. The other guys that I worked with along the way, Ed Ringwald, Pee Wee Charles, and I did a lot of sessions together. And after I started working at the Mercies, they discovered a young lady from London by the name of Marie Bottrell. And so I started working with Marie. I was doing a lot of co-writing with Terry Carisse and Bruce Rollins.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Terry and Bruce would bring in their songs, and then we would kind of rework them a little bit. And I forfeited credit for pretty much most of the time I was there. I have writing credit on one song.
Oh yeah. It's always a tough thing when you come in at that point, right? Because you have a song that's done, and you're tidying it up, making it better. But what you're doing is still pretty major changes to the song. But a lot of people don't end up getting that credit that they deserve at that point.
And you know what? It was really for the love of the people that I was working with, and for the love of the songs that they were writing. I never really felt that I was changing dramatically what they were doing. But Terry and I would work on songs. Windship, I think, is one song that I can remember specifically. And my participation really was more on the arrangement and the feeling. I would change some chords.
Yeah.
We would change some of the melody lines, but not a lot, because they were really Terry and Bruce's songs. They weren't my songs, but I felt like I was participating. And the more I started doing the strings, well, you're arranging the strings, well, now you have to produce the strings, okay?
Yeah.
Because we don't know what to ask the string players to do or not do. So because there was no way to hear anything before the session, and the clock's running and people are being paid, my tendency as far as strings and horns were concerned was to overwrite and then cut.
Yeah.
It's much easier to cut in the studio than it is to be creative on the spot. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So I worked on a bunch of Mercy Brothers albums. And a bunch of other people as well. I worked with Terry Sumption, Dallas Harms, Gary Buck, all these names that I haven't said out loud for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And they were always very gracious to me. And so in some cases, it would be, we need you to produce the session. So slowly but surely, I just kept adding these other responsibilities to what I was doing. The Mercies would be out on the road. We needed to finish a mix on one of their songs. So Paul was the engineer at that time, and Paul and I would produce the mix.
Yeah.
And that would be the way the song came out. Loving You from a Distance was one of the early songs that we did. It did very well in the charts. Silver Dish Cafe was another one that they did. As they became more comfortable working with me, they brought me in to work on some stuff with Marie. So I played piano, did the arrangements, did the strings, designed the album cover for Marie's first record called Just Reach Out and Touch Me.
Yeah.
And I think Marie won Best New Artist of the Year, I think, at that point. Then a couple of years later, Lee Bach was another writer that worked with the Mercies a fair amount, brought in a song called The Star. And it was intended for Marie. They gave me a lot of latitude with that song, and it became Song of the Year, and has propelled Marie into a certain level of fame here in Canada.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, here's what I'd like to do. I just flat top, 2 male background singers, dobro, and string quartet.
Yeah.
And at that time, everybody was doing the big flashy songs. And I said, well, this song in particular is a very solitary kind of song. So I said, let's just give it a whack and see what happens. And at that time, I had also been doing some sessions with a fellow by the name of Al Briscoe. Mm-hmm. And Al was living in Toronto, and we were in Elmira, and I called Al, and I said, come on out to the studio. I want you to play dobro on one song, pay it full scale.
Yeah.
And he said, for one song? And I said, yeah. He said, "Are you nuts?" And I said, "Well, I got a pretty good feeling about this song, and it needs a solo, and I think you're the guy, to be able to deliver that." And so Al came out. We recorded the song. I think I'm trying to remember. I think Marie got female artist of the year that year. It won Song of the Year. I can't remember if it won Album of the Year. Can't remember. But it was one of those experiences that you just, felt that it was the right thing to do at that particular time.
So how did that feel for you as the guy that, put the song together and did it just feel like very natural, or you just?
It was really, really very natural. It didn't do anything for my career.
Yeah.
but it, you know, I thought when Marie sang it, it was such a natural song for her to sing. And I think if she's listening to this, she'd probably tell you that she wished she'd never recorded that song. Because I always say to people when they're coming to do a session with me and they're picking out their songs, I say, well, pick out songs that you want to sing when you're 60.
Oh, yeah.
Because if it's a hit, you will be.
Yeah.
And you'll be asked to sing it all the time,
Yeah.
over and over and over. And I think to this day, Marie gets asked to, you know, to sing that particular song. And she and I have been friends for a long time. So,
Yeah.
and I'm grateful to her for allowing me to convince her to sing that song, you know, that particular way. Excuse me. So Ray Mercy did the background vocals. String quartet were a couple of people from Elmira and a couple of people from the Kitchener Symphony.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm really proud of that record. And I think that that's one of the only times in my career where the clock wasn't running.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because it was the Mercy studio. It was a Mercy publishing song. It was a MBS Records artist. So there was no get it done by noon, you know,
Yeah.
kind of thing to it. On the other hand, it happened very quickly. The song didn't take very long to make. Larry played rhythm. There was no bass. There was no lead guitar. So I think we did the track in a couple of hours.
I think the good songs always kind of happen that way.
Yeah.
Those are always the ones that take forever, and you have to keep reinventing the song and trying new things. Are the ones that aren't quite there yet.
Right.
There's something not quite right.
And you sit back and you say, that was too easy.
Yeah.
Can I do it again? Nope. Not gonna.
It's nice when it comes quick and easy and it all falls in.
Yep.
But then you always get that thing where it's like, am I missing something? That was, you know, I should be doing something else.
Yeah.
But it's a nice feeling when it comes together quickly.
Yeah. One of the last records that I did with the Mercies was, second last, I guess. It was called, the album ended up being called Homemade.
Yeah.
And we came, we collectively came to the determination that we should call it Homemade because it was literally made in, you know, at home.
Yeah.
Larry's daughter did the album cover. I think she was 8, something like that. So it looks like an 8-year-old, you know, did the album cover. And I played piano. I arranged the strings. I did a little bit of background vocal work on it. I did most of the arranging and a lot of the final production. And it came down at that point. People's names were starting to get put on records. Yeah. And I was gently notified that my name couldn't be on the record that many times. So I said, well, okay, then I'd like to use a pseudonym as the producer. So if anybody has that record, Homemade, it's the producer is the very sly Billy Vi.
Oh, there you go.
And Bill Vi is my uncle. So somewhere in his grave, he's rolling around claiming that he's the record producer.
Yeah. So you guys were probably doing a lot of jingles too, right, at the time?
Yes. The fellas, and thanks for that cue, the fellas started a company called the Elmira Jingle Factory.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses were buying jingles at the time, and over my time, I think I wrote 300 or so commercials. I wrote the commercial for Zayres here locally. I did a very bizarre synthesizer commercial for a company. I forget, it was a stereo company. Yeah. And so I did like 30 tracks of synthesizer, just bouncing everything down to, you know, 2 tracks, so the noise on the tape was like crazy by the time we were finished. Yeah. But it was a hoot making that. The guy that owned Dutch Boy Food Markets at the time called me up and he said, "Are you the guy that wrote that Zayres commercial?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I want you to write one for me, for Dutch Boy." I said, "Well, I try to do my best work for everybody, and that's kind of the grocery category, you know, in this area." Yeah. So I said, "Tell you what, write me a letter and tell me all the reasons why I should shop at Dutch Boy." So he was very nice about it. He wrote me back a letter, and for those who are old enough to remember Dutch Boy Food Markets, they might remember that the slogan was Dutch Boy Does It Right. And so that came right out of his letter, and we prepared it that way. Paul and I talked a lot about rhythms when we were making these commercials, because we always thought them as just mini records. Wanted to really make them sound great. And you get a certain audience that claps on 1 and 3, and a certain audience that claps on 2 and 4.
Yeah.
So we said, well, what if we make all 4 beats strong? So you win and you're correct no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the format that came out for the Zehrs commercials. So over the years, we did all kinds of them. And as the 70s went on, everybody wanted the regular commercial that we wrote, and then they wanted a Christmas version. So out come the Jingle Bells.
Yeah.
And then towards the latter part of the 70s, everybody wanted a disco version.
Oh, yeah.
Which was painful.
Yeah.
But we did them, so my time with the Mercies was a huge education, just gigantic. I mean, I could be in that control room or in that studio 24 hours a day if I wanted to. I could try things. There was one song on Homemade, I think it was called Jamie. And I wanted the sound of a triangle, but I wanted the pitch on the triangle to change. Okay. And so we tried everything from, hanging on to the reels of the tape machine to slow them down, speed them up. None of that worked.
Yeah.
So I had been studying acoustic physics at university. I thought, I know how to do this. So we got a bucket of water, and put the mic right close to the water.
Yeah.
Tapped the triangle and then dipped it into the water.
Oh, wow.
And that changes the length of the vibrating source. So the pitch changes. Not very much, but just enough to be subtle, and that's exactly what I wanted. So experimenting was something that we did a lot, doing that sort of thing. So I worked at the Mercy Studio through the 70s. And then at the end of the 70s, technology just went nuts. Consoles were coming out 24-track, 36 tracks, 48 tracks, automated boards, and all the rest of that stuff. And in spite of the fact that our Neve board was really state-of-the-art, it was very difficult to keep clients. We did a lot of the music for the Stratford Festival at that time. Peter Ustinov came out and did some stuff, and Maggie Smith, and the rest of those folks doing voiceovers and doing some off-stage music recording. So it was very difficult. Like I say, clients were leaving to go to the newest, the latest, whatever. Yeah. And a lot of the studios in Toronto were being built at that time. So Manta was being built, and Phase One, and a lot of those places. Eastern Sound was still like the mecca, at that time, and I had done some sessions there that I'll talk about in a second. So the Mercies decided they had to close the place, and I was told on a Monday that they were closing at Christmas. 3 days later, I found out I was going to be a dad for the very first time.
Oh, wow.
And 3 days after that, I left. Okay. And people were very kind to me. There was some initial discussion about trading off some time with some folks in the Ronnie Prophet show when it was going. I didn't want to drive to Toronto, so I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
There were a couple of people that were going on the road. I wasn't crazy about that because I knew I was going to be a dad. So I just kind of hung my shingle out as a freelancer and did some work initially with Terry Sumption, rather. So I arranged, produced, and played piano on Midnight Invitation for Terry. I did that record for him, and Loneliest Star in Texas. And there was a vocal session, and Terry asked me to ask his agent to go home, to leave the studio.
Yeah.
And I said, man, he's your agent, not mine. He said, no, you got to tell him. So I told him, And I won't name names, but that was the last time I ever spoke to that gentleman, and it's the last time he ever reached out to me. And so I found myself unemployed, without a whole lot of record credits, aside from the people who played on the sessions who knew about me.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't real successful at finding a whole lot of work. Oddly enough, after I left the studio was when the CCMA awards came up. Oh, by the way, my CCMA membership number was 11.
Oh, wow.
I think we were the first ones to get involved.
Yeah.
And I think it was in 1982 at the CCMA awards, my work that I had either played on or worked on in some respect was nominated in every category.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty proud of that.
You bet.
But being out of work, and I decided that I would leave the music business to try to get a real job because I was going to be a dad.
Yeah.
And excuse me, I bumped around, trying to get work and trying to get a job, and still had my long hair and a beard, and that didn't go over well with some folks, I'm sure. And my mother sent me a letter that had a 2-line newspaper ad clipped out of the Cambridge Times. Mm-hmm. And it was from my mom's best friend who was living in Cambridge, and she said, it's not the music business, Rob, but it's close. It was a job to work at a radio station. They had two job openings, one in the creative department and one in the sales department. So I went for the interview, and I'm sure I looked like, a hippie from God knows where.
Yeah.
And so I explained to them what my background was. I said, I did all these jingles, and I did all these sessions. And I said, I need a job. I can't afford to fail. Mm-hmm. That was my pitch, right? And they said, okay, well, it was a small station, 1,000 watts.
Wow.
Just like
it's powerful.
Just like WKRP. 1,000 watts in Cambridge, a station that was called CFTJ at the time. Mm-hmm. And the joke was that it was it stood for Come Forth to Jesus. Okay. It was actually named after the previous owner's daughter, Trudy Jean.
Oh, yeah.
So I said, well, which of the two jobs pays more? And they said, well, on a salary, the creative pays more, but in the long term, the sales job's going to pay more. And I said, well, how much is the sales job? $750 a month.
Yeah.
I'll take it. So I became Rob the salesman. I bought a suit.
Yeah.
Said to my wife, okay, I got work. Now we can have the baby. Now we're good.
Yeah. Don't hold the baby anymore.
yeah. Well,
hold it back.
I got the job in May, and my daughter Heather was born in June, so it was pretty tight. And my wife had been working in the publishing office at Wilfrid Laurier.
Yeah.
And she was very pregnant, and her friends at the office kept saying, "Has Rob got work yet? Has Rob got it? Because you're going to have to leave soon."
Yeah.
So I took the sales job, and I said, well, this will just tide us over until I can figure out what's going on. 21 years later, I left the radio business.
You did it for 21 years?
I did.
Wow, I didn't know you did that for that long.
Yeah, and I actually turned my back on music.
Yeah. Didn't
play the piano very much at all, and convinced myself that as long as I thought of myself as a musician, I would never be a salesman. Mm-hmm. And strangely enough, that worked to my advantage because my clients didn't think of me in the same light as a salesman. Yeah. I would go in and my pitch would be, I hate salespeople as much as you do. Mm-hmm. So I'm not here to do that. I'm here to work for you. And I would say to my clients, if there's ever a problem, I will physically sit on your side of the table when discussions have to happen.
Yeah.
I became very successful in the sales business. I was a vice president of sales for a period of time. I worked. My last radio job was with the Chum Radio Group in their Kitchener stations. At the end of my broadcast career, the stations were called Cool FM and Oldies 1090.
Oh yeah.
So I think there's now Virgin Radio and KFUN. I think that's what they are now.
Yeah.
Anyhow, they could not figure out how I was so successful. I would give my clients every benefit of the best possible rate. So I would renew their contracts a couple of months before the rates go up. I'd say, you'll always be a year behind.
Mm-hmm.
And I negotiated things like discounts for advance payment. Mm-hmm. And I would say to my clients, it only hurts the first time. Then everything's there. And, anytime you want to cancel, you just call me up and say cancel.
Yeah.
And you don't owe anybody anything.
Yeah.
That led me to be invited to a conference where I would share my wisdom about being successful in sales. And I said, sure, I'll tell people. And so I went to the conference, and the other salespeople were in the room, and they said, Rob, tell us the secret to your success. And I said, it's pretty easy. I don't work for you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Within a few months, I was asked to leave.
Oh, really?
Yes. During that time, during that 20-year period, my musician brain was still active. Although I wasn't playing the piano, I didn't present myself to my kids as a musician. And I decided that I wanted to write something that I could leave on the shelf for them after I'm gone.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I wanted it to be a long-form piece with no restrictions, like nothing, no form, classical form to it, just a stream of consciousness kind of writing. And I decided I needed a boilerplate of story content that I would be able to work with. And as a kid growing up in Wellsburg, you go to the movie theater, and for a quarter you could watch Frankenstein and Dracula and The Creature from the Black Lagoon and so on and so forth, and Help and
Yeah.
Hard Day's Night, all that stuff. So I picked up a copy of Frankenstein, and that was the only thing I read for 3 years.
Wow.
It's not a very well written book.
Yeah.
Mary Shelley was only 17 when she wrote it, so it kind of jumps around a little bit, and there are stories within the stories. But I wanted to make sure that I could see a straight line in the story before I started writing. While I was still in broadcast sales, so I wrote the libretto or the script, but I had to think of it in musical terms, some of the lyrics, if you will, are directly lifted from the book itself.
Yeah.
Some of them are sections of the book that I collapsed into a smaller section, and wrote it on an old, like one of the first laptops ever, and when I finished it, I then wrote a rhythm book, because I wanted the singing style to feel like elevated speech, Sprachstimme, as we call it in the classical world, right?
Yeah.
And then so when I finished the rhythm book, then I went back and I wrote a melodic book, because I wanted to use my education to do thematic development, within certain melodic lines. I studied 12-tone composition when I was at school, so I utilized retrograde and so a minor descending minor third became the main theme for the whole thing.
Yeah.
I sent it. I called around and I wanted to find an orchestrator, because I didn't think that I wanted to do this on my own. Someone referred me to Glenn Morley. Glenn's a well-respected writer and arranger in Toronto, with Glenn Gould Societies and SOCAN board of directors and so on. So I sent him the libretto, and he very kindly wrote back and said, don't change a word, which is a bad thing to tell somebody.
Yeah.
Because that encourages people. Somebody tell me that it sucks so I can stop, please. Mm-hmm. So Glenn and I worked at his studio in Toronto. He had software that was starting to emulate instruments, and we created the score. then I phoned a friend of mine who is an opera singer, because my concept was that my Damon character, the monster, if you will, would be an opera singer. Okay. And the Victor character would be a musical theater star.
Right.
And my narrator, bookend narrator, Captain Walton, would be a rock star.
Yeah.
So through various, contacts, Ted Berg, who's at University of Western Ontario and is a very well-respected opera singer around the world, agreed. He and I went to school at Laurier. He agreed to sing the role of Damon. I said, well, you know what? You know that guy that's the star of Les Mis in Toronto, Michael Burgess?
Yeah.
I said, I'd really like to have him as my Victor character. Oh, I know. So he said, I know Michael. So he phoned Michael. Michael phoned me, and we said, okay, here we go. So I said, okay, so I've got these two guys. Now I need a rock singer. Who am I going to get to sing a rock singer? So I phoned Pepe. And he said, well, why don't you call Rick Emmett? Rick's done with Triumph, and he might just do it. So I got Rick's number, and Rick said yes.
That's awesome.
So I had my trio of guys. We ended up, and I'll try to abbreviate this story as much as I can. When I was bouncing around from jobs, one of my clients in Hamilton felt sorry for me and gave me a job trying to sell flooring.
Fun.
And so he said, well, what else are you doing musically? What are you doing? So I told him about Frankenstein. And he said, well, let's do it at Hamilton Place. Okay, but I don't have any money. So he helped me cobble together some money. And I first did a sampling, if you will, in Toronto at a place called the Berkeley Church. I think it's still there, but it was a very old Gothic, church with peeling paint on the back walls, so it was a perfect spot for me to do it. So I did a little presentation, and a gentleman came forward and said he wanted to invest, and so that's how we got the money to be able to do Hamilton Place. I think we sold 1,200 seats. I think something like that.
Oh, that's good.
It wasn't bad. And a guy from Wallaceburg showed up from my hometown. He said, I want to invest. I want to put some money in this. And so I said, well, you're crazy, first of all. But he wanted to do it. And turns out he and I are distant relatives. Of course, small towns, that's not a big stretch. Everybody knows everybody. And so we did the performance in Hamilton Place. Some other folks came along as investors. That show has now played at Hamilton Place, the Berkeley Church. We did 5 performances, I think, at Casino Rama.
Oh, wow.
Which I'll tell you about in a second. I think 7,000 people came out to see it there.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to do it in the hippest, coolest place in New York City that I could possibly find. So I got involved with a gentleman in New York, and he invited me to become involved with something called a New York Musical Theater Festival. And I said, well, I don't really want people to judge me. I just want to do it. And he said, well, you can buy your way into the festival. So I said, okay. So I bought my way in. And as it turns out, now my company is one of the founding companies of the New York Musical Theater Festival. We played it with tape and New York performers in a very small theater called The Belt. Seats like 99 people. It's gone now. But B.B. Newirth was doing a show in the next room, basically, to us. And Alec Baldwin was doing it there as well. And so that came and went. And then I said, I want to do something really cool. So in 2009, I think it was, 2009, by the time I had kind of found my way out of the radio business and quasi music, we played it at a place called the Highline Ballroom in Greenwich Village. If anybody knows the New York area, there's the Highline railway that goes down the west side. Excuse me. It's now a walkway. And the Highline Ballroom was right at the end of that. And Paul McCartney played there. Lady Gaga's played there. Queen Latifah. So it's kind of a hip, cool place.
Yeah.
And we played it on Halloween night that night.
All right, cool.
That is one freaky place to be on Halloween night.
I bet.
The East Village has the largest Halloween parade in the world, and everybody dresses up.
Yeah.
The general manager of Madison Square Garden showed up dressed as King Neptune that night. It was great. It was great. So Frankenstein has carried me a bunch of different places. When I left the radio station, they gave me a buyout and an education component. And I said, okay, I want the cash for the education component. By that time, I had found my way to meet Moses Neimer at City TV. And Moses said, have you ever made a film? I said, no. Why not? Well, never really thought about it.
Yeah.
And Bravo TV was at that time handing out grants to make short videos on their thing. So I took Michael Burgess into Lulu's on a dark day, and we shot on film one of the songs from Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Which was great. It went to number 1 on the Bravo Fact Countdown, which I'm very pleased. I have a picture on the wall of that in my office. And around that time, there was a website starting up called classmates.com. So I thought, well, I'm going to put my name in, find out what that's all about. I was contacted by 2 former girlfriends from high school right away, one of whom was living in Florida. And she said, so what are you doing? In email back and forth. And I told her. And she said, well, I'm living on Marco Island, and there's something called the Marco Island Film Festival.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you submit your film and come down here and show it at the festival? Why not? So I send it down. They accept it. And this is where all the serendipity starts happening, this kind of stuff. So I went down to Florida on the education money.
Yeah.
And played Frankenstein several times through the course of the festival, not really thinking much of anything of it. Here I am in Florida. I'm at a film festival. This is great.
Yeah.
Here's my film. Where's the bar? Right.
Yeah.
And so the last night of the festival came along, and I was enjoying myself at the reception.
Yeah.
And they were handing out the awards. And so the MC came up and he said, and the award for best music in a short film goes to, ta-da, Frankenstein. And it was the Tim Rice Award. And Tim co-wrote with Andrew Lloyd Webber. And Tim lived on Marco Island. And so I won, that award.
Wow.
They took us on a filmmaker's cruise around Marco Island.
Yeah.
And I met the lady that was handing out sandwiches, and I thought she looked really familiar. And her name is Mary Lee South. And so we were talking, and she said, and where are you from? And I said, up north. And she said, the Hamptons?
Further.
A little further north. And so later on, I was told that I probably shouldn't have been speaking with her because she's somewhat of a celebrity. And turns out she's Tom Cruise's mom.
Oh, no way.
And I thought she looks familiar, so that's what Tom would look like if he was a female. So while in Florida, my friend and her husband hosted me for a dinner, and they had friends there from England, and they had a grand piano in the house, and said, "Well, could you play something from Frankenstein?" Well, sure, why not?
Yeah.
I'm still enjoying myself, key lime pie and some champagne. And so these folks said, well, we might be able to help you over in England. Really? To bring it to the West End. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
So I'm still on the education money, and I fly over to England and met some rather dishonest people.
Oh, yeah.
That claimed that they could help, but there was no help. I mean, these folks were wonderful, but the people that they connected me with were really just wannabes, right? That's fine. I enjoyed England. I was right near Covent Garden. So it was a great experience. While I was there, getting back to Heathrow, to the airport, my wife called and said, "You'll never guess who called." I said, "Who?" "You'll never guess." I said, "Okay." "Can't you tell me?" "No, you have to guess." I said, "I'm in England. It's a 5-hour flight to get home. You've got to tell me." So she didn't tell me until I got home. And she said, "Larry called." I said, "Larry? Who's Larry?" She said, "Larry Gregson." I said, "Oh my God, I haven't talked to Larry Gregson for 20 years.
Yeah.
Larry, at the end of my Mercy Brother career, was general managing the Mercy Brothers recording studio. And he had started working with Marie. So he and I, did some of the Marie stuff, and we went out and found a band, or he found the band, and I approved and rehearsed with them. And it was Bill Carruthers and his family band at the time, with Dave playing steel, and the other fellows I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm getting old. So I knew that Larry had gone to Nashville after the Mercy studio closed. And then I had heard that he went to Las Vegas, because I'm jumping around here, but he and I had done a record in about 1980 or so with an artist by the name of Ruth Ann Wallace. And I did a couple of singles for her, and I think we won Best New Artist, I think, with Ruth Ann at that time. And so Larry connected with Irving Azoff in L.A., and Irving said, "I'll tell you what, I'll give you a budget and a 3-record deal." So I think he gave us $100,000 or something like that. Yeah. And I never managed the money, thank God. But contracted the players. We went to Nashville. We worked at a place that at that time was called Music City Music Hall, which is the old RCA Studio A. Yeah. Okay, the big room. And so I had David Briggs, I had Larry Paxton, I had all of the A players at the time, brought in Charlie McCoy, brought in the Nashville String Machine to do it really did, a good record. And at that time, I'm sorry for jumping around, but this is the way my brain works these days. Yeah. I had been working in Cambridge. So I said, I'm going to take my holidays and I'm going to go down to Nashville. I'm going to make this record and then I'll be back. So while we were in Nashville, which was a wonderful experience, we got a call from Irving and said, I'd like you guys to come out to L.A. to do a song for a movie that we're working on. So Irving had just finished, he was doing the music supervision, or his company was, for Urban Cowboy, okay, with Johnny Lee. And they had just done, another animated movie. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, and he had a music guy, Bob Destocki. And so I had to call home and say, I'm not coming home. I'm going to L.A. And so they flew us to L.A. and they said the movie, while we're in L.A., you're going to do the song for the movie. You're going to do a duet with Johnny Lee. Okay. And the song's called I Keep Running Back to You. Johnny only sings in one key, so you have to do it in this key. Yeah. So they sent us to the record plant to rehearse, and then we were at Westlake Audio on Beverly Boulevard in L.A. with Irene Cara was there, Quincy Jones. They were doing the Bad album with Michael Jackson at that time, I think, in that building. So we did the record. They said, when you're here, you can get anybody from Full Moon Records to play as a guest on Ruth Ann's record. So I said, okay, I'd like Don Henley and Glenn Frey. Okay, no problem. So we're all prepared to go into the session, and I said, and Don Felder to play guitar. Oh, yeah. Okay. And Irving said, no problem. So we went to the studio, got up that morning to go to the studio, and Irving called and said that Glenn and Don had a fight. No surprise. And they had gone their separate ways, so they weren't available. Yeah. But we're going to send in J.D. Souther and Timothy Schmidt
Well,
to sing. So I was in the control room or in the studio rather, at the piano with JD and Timothy, singing with those two guys. They said, "Well, what do you want us to sound like?" I said, "I want you to sound like the Eagles. Come on."
yeah.
And so they did a great job. They had some recreational stuff while we were there, and I asked my because we were doing it for Warner Brothers at the time, and I said, "So how does this go on the budget?" And he said, "Miscellaneous entertainment."
Yeah.
And then Don came in and did several overdubs. He was terrific, and I called my wife from the studio. I said, "I've arrived. I'm here. This is it." You know, because I said, JD's going out with Linda Ronstadt right now, and you know, Timothy's here, and all these guys are here, and I made it. And then I said, and they booked us an interview with a syndicated country music writer in Chicago. So on the way home, we're going to stop in Chicago. We're going to do this national news thing, and so I was thrilled. I got home, and the announcement was made that Irving had accepted the job as the president of MCA Home Entertainment.
Oh, yeah.
So suddenly Warner Brothers wasn't interested in the song, and now I'll go back to the song. I Keep Running Back for You was intended for the first Vacation movie. There's a point where Chevy Chase is in the pool with Christy Brinkley, and I can't remember the other actress's name, comes out and sees them, right? So there was a scene, I'm not sure if it ever made it to the movie or not, but Chevy Chase was supposed to go into the bar, and this song was supposed to be playing on the jukebox.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Warner said, "Forget it, we don't want the song." So, another sad story for Rob. I've got another sad one too. I'll come back to it in a second because I take great pleasure in my sadness.
Yeah.
So we came back, and Irving went to MCA Home Entertainment. So Warner's didn't want the record, so we put it on MCA, and then it had to be vetted by MCA Nashville. Can't remember the guy's name who was running MCA Nashville, but he explained, not to me, so this is indirect, and I don't even know how accurate it is, that he got points on every record that went across his desk.
Oh, yeah.
So my understanding of the reaction was, not this time. Fine, okay. So we had recorded, I think, 15 songs for a 12-song album, and this gentleman picked the very worst of the bunch as the first release. We got a contractual release in the back rows of Walmart, and the record died. The good news is Ruth Ann is doing very, very well. Her husband is David Onley, the former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. So every once in a while I bump into people that know Ruth Ann, and so they enjoy that story. So yeah, that ended, and that fast forward, a bunch of years. During my looking for work period, Pee Wee felt that I should be playing piano with Gord, with Lightfoot.
Yeah.
He didn't have a piano player at the time, and I said, "Oh, that'd be great." So they invited me out to a bunch of shows, and so I got to meet Gord and Rick and Barry and the other guys. And we got to be friends-ish, as much as you can in that kind of world. And Gord and I talked about how we were going to handle tuning and all the rest of that stuff. And I have a picture of Gord with my daughter on one knee and Pee Wee's daughter on the other knee, which is kind of neat. And so Ed said, "Well, we go into the studio every January, and then we go to Massey Hall in the spring, and that's where we play the stuff from the new record."
Yeah.
I said, "Great." So he said, "Gord does things spur of the moment. You have to be ready for that." I said, "That's fine." So I learned I learned how to play guitar picking style on the piano.
Yeah.
So that I could emulate, or I could help, along with that. And I learned pretty much all of Gord's material. So they were in the studio in January, and Gord said, "Get the piano player." So Pee Wee ran for the phone, and so did the engineer. I wasn't home.
Oh, no.
So the next time I was in Gord's presence, he very graciously said, that he was sorry that it didn't work out. And I said, well, that's fine. So yeah, that's one of my many sad stories. Sad stories. So fast forward again, way up, and so Larry Gregson. When I got home from England, I called Larry and he said, "How would you like to do what we used to do?" Sure, why not? I got nothing else to do,
Yeah.
Not working. And Larry had discovered a young lady in Nashville and invited me up to start working with her. And during our conversations, he said, I booked these big acts to come into Casino Rama. But what I'd really like to be able to do is to be more in control of timing, because you have to wait for touring, routing, and all the rest of that stuff, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I could do that. So we decided that we would try a licensed theater piece. And so I went to my buddies in New York that I had made friends with by this point, and we got a casino license to play Forever Plaid.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a very small show.
Yeah.
And it's usually played in front of like 300 people. I think our smallest audience was 1,500,
Yeah.
and our largest was 3,500 to see the show. And it worked, We would play that show from Sunday through Wednesday. The headliners would come in Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah.
And we'd rotate like that. Then Larry moved to Fallsview Casino in Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
And he invited me to come and do Forever Plaid again. So we did it. It worked very well. 1,500 seat room there.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, let's try something else. So then I got the license to do Nonsense. And we brought that in. We did a kind of casino jig to it, to make it twerk it a little bit.
Yeah.
And it did fine as well. And then he said, why don't you write something that you could own? So when it came time to write a show, the music that I was most familiar with initially was country music. And I felt that the people in the audience would not just like country music; they would love country music. And that I had to find a way to entertain them without showering them with famous names. So I knew the music that was most interesting, and I, again, like with Frankenstein, I felt that I needed a hook to hang this show on.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So instead of just playing music just with people that the audience wouldn't know, I felt that would bore them.
Yeah.
So I started thinking of how I would organize the music, because this is working with well-known music. So went through the vetting process, a lot of it with Larry, to determine which songs people in the audience who didn't like country music would still recognize.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was very tough, because you have to rule out some songs that I would really like, but I had to imagine that the guy or the lady sitting in the audience wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
And I would lose them as an audience. So the list ended up being like 50 songs or something like that. So I thought, well, how on earth am I going to do this? I know. So I tell people this with a straight face. I imagine myself at a party, and we're all singing these songs that we know. And when we're singing, the chorus and the verse or the bridge, and then we go la 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 because we don't know the next ones, that's when I'm going to stop right there.
Yeah.
So I will use the most recognizable sections of each song.
Yeah.
And I will create suites, not medleys, but suites of songs. Put them in chronological order, starting from 1950, leading up to the present day. And then when I get to my artists, I'll ask each of the artists what one country song they'd like to do in its entirety. Mm-hmm. So a full-length song. So we would go through that process to do that. And then I thought, okay, that's all well and good, but we're going to come up with 80 or 90 minutes of music that doesn't mean anything other than, hey, you sing well, that sort of thing. So I knew that I had to create a thread that people could hang on to tell the story. Mm-hmm. So the title of the show became Country Classics, which was clearly what you're going to hear. And then the subtitle was Treasures from the Attic.
Yeah.
And so the concept was really pretty simple. A man gets sent up to the attic every spring to clean it out and can't because of all the memories that live in the attic, the 78s and the cassettes. And so we would go through the course of time. And in order to be able to tell those stories, little vignettes, I had to determine, I'm a very analytical guy, as you'll find out. I decided that I didn't want to have that character talk for any more than 10 minutes over the entire piece.
Yeah.
So all the vignettes would bridge sections of time or styles of music, and I would be the subject. So because I was sent up to the attic every year to clean it out.
Yeah.
And so you see cribs and you see, family albums that get shoved up into the attic because you don't want them in the house.
Yeah.
And yet when you go up there, you say, well, I remember that from when I was a kid, or my uncle played that, and it's my uncle's ukulele, and so on and so forth. And so what you end up with is a real heartfelt storyline that is so thin that it's really easy to follow, and there's easy jokes. Like, so there's a joke in Country Classics where I have the character pick up two basketballs, hold them in front of him. The first thing he says, "You remember Dolly Parton?"
Oh yeah.
And so the cheap laughs are always the best.
Yeah.
Right. And it ended up being really successful. And the audience loved it, and we end the show with the hymn of country music, "Will the Circle Be Unbroken?" Mm-hmm. And we play Orange Blossom Special, and the audience just followed with us completely. And so we would, again, at Fallsview, we would play like Sunday through Thursday and load everything out, and then Dolly Parton would come in on the weekend and do her thing. And it proved to be very, very successful for the casino.
Yeah.
Because our focus was not you're working in a casino. Our focus was you're playing to an audience. So you want that audience. And at that time, Larry said to me, "There's only one rule: Glenn Fry is on before you, Dolly Parton is on after you, and then Reba McEntire. So you have to be as good as or better than them."
Yes.
No pressure. Mm-hmm. So that show was so successful, they came back and he said, "Can you do one? Can you build one on the same foundation for 50s music?" Mm-hmm. Sure. I had my little formula, you know. And so I created Cruisin' Classics. And the subtitle for that is A Night at the Diner.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing. The script came out of my hometown experiences with a ice cream shop that I used to go to. Mm-hmm. And the family that owned it were kind enough to let me use their family name. The name of the place is called Chuck's, and so on.
Yeah.
So that was also very successful. And this past summer, we ran it for 10 weeks, sold out for 10 weeks. It did really well. When I was in Nashville auditioning for the country show, I was auditioning a lot of very talented female singers and male singers, but females in particular. And I was saying to some of my friends at the CAA, why don't these young ladies have deals? Mm-hmm. And they said, because nobody's looking, literally.
Yeah.
So I said, well, what would happen if I looked? And they said, you'd be the only one. Okay. So I phoned up and I said, I've got an idea for a show just called Six Chicks because it rhymes.
Yeah.
And each of these girls comes to Nashville with dreams of being stars. And so the storyline would be these girls all come to Nashville. So here's the up and comers. Right?
Yeah.
Again, really successful. We would do autograph lines after the shows, and 500 or 600 people would line up for autographs from people that he didn't know.
Oh yeah.
And that whole thing, and it came up and they said, well, let's do a big classic rock show. Okay.
Yeah.
So I created World Rock Symphony Orchestra. There's 50 people on stage for that show.
Wow.
And it's been playing for years. We're playing in Kitchener again this coming fall. And then my wife came home. By this point, she had started working at Center in the Square. Mm-hmm. And she asked me, she said, have you ever considered doing an Elvis show? And I said, oh, God, no. Please, no. Well, I met this guy who's doing a show for the firefighters, and it was creepy. Mm-hmm. He came in and he sat in the boardroom, didn't say a word, but my God, did he look like Elvis.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So she dragged me out to see him. Literally, I was not an Elvis fan. To see him at a couple of theaters, and I had lunch with him, and found out that he knows that he's not Elvis, mm-hmm. which is a big part of that world.
Yeah.
And so I went to the casino and I said, have you guys ever thought of doing an Elvis show? And they said yes and no. Mm-hmm. Yes, we thought of it. No, we never will, because they're all crap.
Yeah.
Basically. And I said, well, what if I created a show that was completely and totally respectful of the audience? Folks who like Elvis are often ridiculed because of the way they dye or wear their hair, mm-hmm. or because they have sideburns and they like glitter coats and so on and so forth. And I said, but really, they're no different than Deadheads or Parrot Heads or any other, hardcore fan.
Yeah.
But most impersonator shows, and I'll use that in the most derogatory way, are cheesy.
Yeah.
And they make fun of the character. And these folks, they're very serious. They're in love with that character.
Yeah.
So I said, what if I created a show that was in love with the audience? And so I brought Steve, the fellow that does the show, in, and for a piano and voice audition on stage, and he was not very good.
Oh, yeah.
He was very nervous.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, let me bring him back in with a track that he's used to. We'll put him in costume and put a spotlight on him, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And so he came back in during a break in one of the other shows that I was doing, and they brought all the executives in. And they said, at the end, they said, we'll take 24 shows.
Wow.
In a row. In one. I don't think I'd ever seen a 24 show run there before.
Yeah.
And so I did what I wanted to do, which was to fall in love with the audience, to respect the music. And I would say, and I say this in all the shows, when we're in rehearsal, we're playing for people who love this stuff. And if you don't love this stuff, go home.
Yeah.
Because it'll show. And we'll lose the audience. They'll turn on us, and it just won't work.
Yeah.
So, and I said, we're going to do this the right way. So Return to Grace has a 5-piece rhythm section. We have 8 background singers, a full-on gospel quartet, a trio of ladies, and a descant, 5 strings, 5 horns, 6 dancers. So there are 31 people on stage altogether, and a narrator.
Yeah.
And so, following my template of the narration, I determined that the audience kind of turned away from the bad parts of Elvis's life. Mm-hmm. So I determined that the last time that he was really in good shape and really at top was the Aloha concert.
Yeah.
So we take it right from 1954 right through until the end of the Aloha concert. And that show it's the most successful show in the history of that casino. It's taken us to Bangkok for 2 performances,
Wow.
believe it or not. We did a tour of Western Canada in May of this year. We'll go back into a Mirvish building in Toronto for the 3rd time.
Yeah.
We played 2 runs at the Ed Mirvish Theatre, which is the old Pantages Theatre, where Phantom played.
Yeah.
And we've grossed 7 figures there, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
And now we're going into the Princess of Wales, which is the biggest theater in the country and the biggest city in the country. So it's a nice spot.
Oh yeah.
I have gradually moved off the stage myself.
Yeah.
So perhaps these days I'm better known for producing shows at Fallsview.
Yeah.
Better known for that than I am as a piano player. But I end up being the de facto music director, doing the arrangements, all of the casting, the set design,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. And it's really because I enjoy all those elements. And so my career has really not taken me in the same path as a lot of my friends. And so I think I'm a little different than a lot of them. I'm not out there. I'm kind of enigmatic. I'm kind of under the surface,
Yeah, kind of fly under the radar.
I know a lot of people, and like I say, I'm friends with people who work with other people. So I'll give an example. I auditioned and hired a guy by the name of Scott Sheriff, a piano player in Nashville. Scott is now Carrie Underwood's piano player.
Oh yeah.
Same day, I auditioned a guy by the name of Randy Liego, also a piano player,
Yeah.
and a sax player. And Randy is now with the Beach Boys.
Oh yeah.
In New York, I met Robert Martin, who's better known perhaps as Bobby Martin. And Robert played with Frank Zappa for many years. And if you Google whipping posts and Robert Martin, you'll see him in Spain with Frank doing his thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I go out looking for people, it's like, who do you know?
Yeah.
So when I did my rock and soul show, which was an R&B version of my classic rock show,
Yeah.
I hired John Legend's horn section.
Mm-hmm.
I hired Mike. Now I'm going to forget Mike's last name. Mike Miller from Chick Corea's band.
Yeah.
I hired guys from the Lincoln Center Orchestra in New York. One sax player that played with Whitney Houston for many, many years. Terrence Higgins, who's Ani DeFranco's drummer. Sharon Hendricks, who's Jimmy's niece. And so I've been really lucky. I know all these really, really incredible people. CeCe Winans, guitar player, works for me. A background singer with CeCe Winans is one of my singers that I've hired before.
Yeah.
And so I think I have a reputation of being a pretty decent guy to work with.
Yeah.
Honestly, when you called me, I was very surprised and very flattered. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. It's a fascinating career, and I mean it's neat. I think with everybody in the music industry, you tend to go through phases, right?
Yep.
And you get your start, and you always have somewhere to go, but you just never know where you're going to end up, which is true for me as well. And I look back. When I started, I didn't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now.
No.
But it's neat, and it's all from people you meet, and I always say relations are the most important thing in the music industry.
Absolutely.
And because what you're doing now doesn't mean what you're going to be doing tomorrow, and that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. It just means you got to be diverse enough to be able to do something else.
Well, in the accident world, when I was working on World Rock Symphony Orchestra, I was tracking the success of Trans-Siberian Orchestra in the U.S. and felt that at some point they're gonna wane.
Yeah.
Right. And so I thought, well, it'd be really cool to put this big honkin' classic rock show on the road. So I thought, well, how am I going to do this? Oh, I know. I'll call the guy who general manages Trans-Siberian Orchestra. So I found out who he was. I've looked up his website, and there was a phone number on the website. I phoned the number.
Yeah.
I get a guy saying, who is this? So I told him who I was. How'd you get my number? I said, it's on your website. He was in rehearsal with Trans-Siberian Orchestra in Omaha.
Oh, yeah.
And they rehearse. They have two touring companies.
Yeah.
So one is at one end of the arena doing tech, and the other one's doing music, and then they switch back and forth over a 10-day period.
Yeah.
So David and I have been friends now for a long, long time, and I got him to general manage our Western tour of Return to Grace, and he's now brought in some of his friends. So we're now unofficially being represented by William Morris in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And so the good news is you're with William Morris, and the bad news is you're with William Morris, because you never know where you are in the ladder.
Yeah.
Right? So apparently we're about to find out whether or not we're going to be touring again through the U.S.
Yeah.
So that could become a long-term thing, could be short-term, could be nothing. I could be, back at the grocery store next week. And the weird thing is, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Well, that you have to be. And I think the world of music and touring and doing everything means you got to do the big shows, you got to do the small shows, and
that's right,
and everything in between, and you have to be okay with all of that. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the nicest thing is when somebody in the audience approaches you and said, in some way you've affected them in a positive way.
Yeah.
That's really where the best time of the night is. You watch for the standing ovation, hoping that it comes.
Yeah.
Then you hope that it starts at the back of the room, because that's a legit, standing O. And then somebody stops and says, you said something that made me remember something, or I feel better now having been here. And so whether you're performing for 5 people or 5,000 people, it really doesn't matter.
No.
In our world.
Yeah, I always look at it as you're performing a show for individually for every single person there.
Absolutely.
It's not for the group. It's just for that you're doing, if you got 500 people in the audience, you're doing 500 shows at the same time.
And yet I've seen some performers who do that.
Yeah.
There's a fourth wall, and they don't break it.
Yeah.
I'm very much in favor of talking to the audience, and that's why my scripts all speak past the musicians and speak directly to the audience.
Yeah.
And I've seen you and your family do that here, and the audience, they feel, they know you've spoken directly to them.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. They want to feel like you're a part of what's going on. So
huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been an awesome conversation, and I know a lot more about you now. Fascinating. And I know that you have returned. It's Return to Grace is the Elvis show, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And that's coming up. So if you see any Rob shows out there, make sure you check them out. They're all fantastic. And I know you put a lot of work into them, and it's been very successful. So that's congratulations.
Thanks, Darren.
And we'll hope to work and see you much more in the future.
You bet.
All right. Thank you.